Hey guys, and I'm back, and today I'm gonna be talking about Ghosts of the Shadow Market, Cast Long Shadows, which is the 9th book, if we're going by our chronological order. Finally the 9th one, yay, and it's the first one in the Ghosts of the Shadow Market series. Overall, it was a solid short story, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. It wasn't relatable, it wasn't entertaining, it didn't make me think, it didn't have that emotional connection with me. It was pretty forgettable for me, which doesn't mean that this would be the case for you. And because I'm trying to be more unbiased about it, I'm gonna talk more about objective things that I see in it rather than just the fact that it didn't do much for me. The story is a bit too simplistic, but again, it works as a short story. The plot was a lot tighter than in most of her writing, but it still went a bit on a tangent. And this short story is also important for setting things up for the future novels, which is nice, but it makes those reveals in the future novels not as impactful. Speaking of reveals, going forward, there will be spoilers. It takes place in London in 1901, in the Shadow Market, with the flashbacks to the 1899 Shadowhunter Academy, and the main character of this one is Matthew. So we're back to talking about the second generation that comes after Charlotte and Tessa and Will and that whole gang. This story starts with the line, "Old sins cast long shadows." And it's such a great line because it's so true, and also it pretty much perfectly encapsulates this story. The main theme behind this story is that actions have consequences, and when you do bad actions, or when you commit a sin, that sin can have negative repercussions for years to come. Or, in other words, the old sins can cast long shadows. How our mistakes cause us to feel guilt, remorse, and shame, which is, again, extremely difficult to get rid of. In the story, Matthew has doubts about whether or not he is the real son of his parents, and so he doesn't think of anything better than to buy a truth potion from a fairy and then give that potion to his mother. As a result, that potion causes his mother to get extremely sick and almost die, and she also loses her pregnancy. And this makes Matthew feel extremely guilty, and this guilt ends up eating away at him in the future novels going forward. The writing style overly explains everything a bit too much. It makes sense if you read this book as a standalone, but if you read this book after having read all of the other books in the way that I've done it, the writing style comes across as annoying, because it keeps on revealing information that you already know. And another thing, I found the whole dialogue between Matthew and brother Zachariah or Jem a bit too clunky and awkward. I'm not exactly sure why that's the case, but something about it just doesn't sound natural to me. The book also goes into Matthew's backstory and his relationship with his father Henry, and I don't care how the book tries to justify it, Henry is a horrible father. I understand he's disabled, but him forgetting to eat is not part of his disability. It should not be the responsibility of the son to take care of his father in this way. Knowing that about himself, Henry should have made different arrangements. They're wealthy, for crying out loud. They have servants. Just instruct your servants to remind you to eat and take care of you in other ways. It should not be your son's job to do that for you. And what about Charlotte? Why did she not arrange for the help or helped Henry herself instead of relying on Matthew? It's sad to see a character that you like be shown in such a bad light, but it makes sense for Henry's character to be this way. Henry loves his inventions, and it makes sense for him to love his inventions more than he loves his son. Confrontation that Matthew has with Alistair is also great, because the situation with Alistair parallels the situation with Matthew. And just like Matthew's sins will cast long shadows on Matthew's life, Alistair's sins will also cast long shadows on Alistair's life. As a result of Alistair being a bully, that will end up having consequences to his relationship with Matthew and James and all these other characters in the future novels going forward. The story also went a bit on a tangent, with Matthew going out with James and meeting Lucy. That whole part felt a bit too contrived, and it felt like it was just there so that we could be introduced to Lucy, who will be an important character later on, but she doesn't do much in this specific story. She just doesn't add anything. So that whole part, it just felt like it was shoehorned in there so that we could be introduced to those characters, and the way that it was done was also pretty boring. Overall, I would give this story a 4 out of 5 stars. It was a bit too simplistic, but it is a pretty solid short story. The only two things I didn't really like about it were that tangent and the writing style. Yeah guys, thanks guys for listening, and happy reading.